in the back of the room. There were a few programs printed just in case you like something on paper, but we will have, of course, slides. Thank you for coming. This is always an interesting opportunity to hear from our peers and colleagues about different internship opportunities. And also, since it's the end of, or we're approaching the end of the academic year, not quite the end, I want to also just congratulate our seniors. And I know not that many of them could come, but I made cookies because it is senior acknowledgement. So
thank you.
Congratulations to our seniors. And eat cookies, pizza, drinks, help yourselves. Okay?
Now that I know that you made them, Deirdre, I might
Pardon?
actually. Now that I know that you made them personally.
I did, brownies too. Brownies too. So I'm Deirdre Hennebury. And Christy, are you hiding in the back? Oh, Christy Alkins is there. And so we are the administrative team for the Museum of Studies minor. So I just want to make sure most of you know who we are, but just in case. A couple things about the Museum Studies website I always like to highlight. Yes, got a new picture. If you don't have your t-shirt yet, make sure you check in with me or with Christy so that you have one that you can wear with pride. And I also, if you don't frequently check this, please do. We just had a virtual presentation, really interesting. An alumna of the graduate program talked, she's a law student, talked about some of her research looking at Nazi-looted art, legislation around provenance, legislation around restitution. So really interesting talk, and you never know what you might find there. I also just want to mention that we will have student features. So Mahalina Dimakali, she worked at the Matai Botanical Gardens on a really interesting installation there. And we do put information from previous colloquia up there. So if you ever want, like, what were students up to, you're welcome to check that out as well. Also, don't be surprised if I tap you for maybe having a student profile. Yes, Evalicia is featured from her work in a previous semester at the Detroit Observatory. So it's nice to have kind of the flavor of things that students are up to on our website. So without further ado, let us move into the real purpose for us being here. This is our lineup. We're going to start with Josephine, then Sophie. I moved things around a little bit from an earlier version, so this is why, because I know Sophie has a commitment. She was not able to stay right till the end. But then otherwise, we'll hear from Ashlyn, Adia, Bond, and then Russell. And what I've done all is just made tabs for each of you, so you can just happily come, get started. The pointer works. Use it with abandon. Yes, thank you so much.
Hi. Hello, everybody. As it says, my name is Josephine. I'm a docent at the Natural History Museum in my free time. And then I also, this past semester in the fall, I did an independent study with Dr. Brian Miller. And I did it on Star Wars, hence all of the wonderful references that are going to be in this presentation. So, essentially for the fall semester, I was a Padawan, learning the Star Wars, novice for the Jedi, learning how to work in a museum. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, last semester, I again did this independent study under Dr. Brian Miller, and the kind of focus of this was in helping him build a course that is running this semester on the colonial and orientalist nature of Star Wars. And you may be wondering, looking at my image, saying, that's not Star Wars. You're right. This is going to be an image of Ming the Merciless from the Flash Gordon comics of the 1930s. I know most of us are too young for those, but it was a big influence on George Lucas when he was creating Star Wars. And so, if you're pulling from this image of a man that is referenced to be Asian and he's not Japanese, he's not Chinese. They form one monolith of an Asian evil man, and that is kind of what Ming the Merciless here is representing. Ming is the Chinese dynasty, and then he's the emperor of Mongo. And so there's a lot of different tropes and stereotypes and random bits and bobs of Pan-Asian culture forced into one character, and we can see that a lot happening in Star Wars as well. But and then of course the obvious artistic references of they could do decent skin colors, and they choose to make Asian-based characters completely gaudily yellow, and they have a Fu Manchu mustache, and so these are all just in-your-face stereotypes that were prevalent in the 30s, but if you look into Star Wars nowadays, you do a little bit more digging, and you can see that as well. For example, there is a race called the Neimoidians that are evil in the prequels. They have heavy Japanese or Asian accents, and they have slit rectangle-shaped eyes. And so there's things just barely under the surface where if you start to pick apart Star Wars and really think about the media that you're digesting, they're based in a lot of racist stereotypes. And so, again, that's going with Orientalism, themes of Orientalism, colonialism, and just stereotypes all throughout the media. But also, there's a positive spin that's coming nowadays with indigenous futurism and Afrofuturism. And so they can look at this media, realize there are problems with it, but also get inspired to create different works. And so one example of that here is going to be with this Hopi R2-D2. So they made a working R2-D2 robot, and they have a bunch of images from Hopi pottery inscribed on it. So my favorite one, and the one I talk about here, is this little green thing that is the power switch for the R2-D2. You can press it, and that's the on-off switch, and that is a Hopi symbol for strength. And so there's a lot of kind of hidden motifs throughout here. And the cool thing about that is that exhibit is in Durango, Colorado, and that is me in my, if you know me, that's my hat. I wear it everywhere. And so we got to go to Durango, Colorado to go and see this exhibit. Getting ahead of myself, what I did through this independent study was a semester's worth of reading and then some. Oh my gosh, it was a lot of reading. So I had to ground myself in both all of the Star Wars literature, of what's going on in the universe, but also so I had to read the Star Wars literature, watch all the movies again. I know, terrible homework. And then I had to read kind of the academic interpretations of Star Wars, and then I also had to read the kind of the base literature where it's Frantz Fanon and other big thinkers from a while ago where they were basing these critiques on. So it was a lot of reading and a lot of homework, some fun, some not so fun, but I had to ground myself in the academic background. Another thing I did is I worked on condition reports through UMAA, the University of Michigan Museum of Anthropological Archaeology. And so we have important context here is that we did all this research to help make the class, and also at UMA right now there's a curriculum collection based off of some of this work that I did, and so I had to do all the condition reports for the things that were leaving UMA and going on display. And so that is one thing that I learned I didn't like about museum work. It was very, very time consuming, and I think that's important that I learned that I didn't like doing that, and now I'm not going to try to be a curator or that sort of thing where I have to do all that intricate work. And so I always think it's important when I try new things that I'm oh, I don't want to do that for the next 40 years. And so that's something I really appreciate about independent studies like this, because I can learn what I actually like to do and what I don't like to do. And so a lot of this education and talking to people, I can do that pretty well. I'm funny, it works. But with collections management and intricate stuff, not my thing. Then I did museum labels for all of the stuff that was going on display. Then, of course, we got that trip to Durango, Colorado, which was very wonderful because they don't have really anything published online about it. But this is actually the sequel. So they did the Center for Southwest Studies in Durango, Colorado has the Return of the Force exhibit. So there's a bunch more work, not just the indigenous R2-D2, of indigenous artists kind of looking at Star Wars, resonating with it, and creating a bunch of different multimedia pieces about it. So very interesting. I would definitely recommend looking it up. And then again, this resulted in that curriculum collection at UMA that you can go and see. And then not the experiences you were looking for. So I went into this. I was like, oh, this is a class. I'm going to do some research. This is going to be fun. I did so many random things. All within the realm of the museum studies discipline. And I actually kind of really appreciated that because, again, I did collections management, I did exhibit creation, I did background research, I did labels, I did everything kind of top to bottom in this process. And so I didn't really know what I was going for, or what this was going to be going into it, hence the funny title, but it was actually really, really cool. And so I learned a lot about how to create an exhibit. That is something I've never done before. In the first museum studies course, you make a little online one, but the little online one is very, very different from the intricacies of making one in real life. And so I learned a lot about how to talk with higher ups and kind of work through museum politics and kind of work between this humongous idea of an exhibit you have in your head where George Lucas himself comes and says, this is perfect, and then, what actually happens with results of budget restrictions, hour restrictions, space restrictions, all of that sort of stuff. And so it's really interesting to kind of follow the process beginning to end from this grand vision that is never going to happen to a real and really cool exhibit that does happen. And so just a lot of experience working with the realities of museum studies and kind of taking the literature that we've read through the museum studies program and actually putting it into practice and seeing how it really works. And then one of the important things that I learned is just networking and good communication skills. With going to Durango, Colorado, it was a lot of handshaking, a lot of meeting new people, a lot of meeting other museum scholars, which I've learned throughout this process is really, really important. I know there's people that I've met through the 400 level required museum studies course, and it's like, oh, you're my boss now. And so it's really interesting to see how interconnected all the museums are, even places all the way out in Arizona or out in Colorado, and they've heard of Michigan, or they've heard of one scholar or another, and so it's really interesting to kind of form those connections and get your name out there. And then another thing, so all of us have kind of history of art anthropology degrees. At one point or another, you're going to look at yourself and say, I don't have a really cool STEM degree that's going to make me a bunch of money. I know we've all done that, but it's interesting to kind of be at the end of my college career and not really regret that, because I have made leaps and bounds in my communication and public speaking skills and my ability to just work with others on an interpersonal level. And I think that is actually really, really helpful. We're in college, you can meet some people that are fantastic at research and not so great at teaching, and people that are, and vice versa. So I'm happy with my anthropology and museum studies degree for, learning how to interact with people, how to communicate ideas effectively, how to create really meaningful learning opportunities, such as with the exhibit that I made. And that is it for me. Do we do questions?
Yeah, we can take a question. Anyone have a quick question for Josephine Bond?
So how did it feel, I guess, translating something, this fictional world, it's an intangible thing, into working with physical, real, hands-on stuff? How was it making that jump for you?
I mean, it's really interesting, especially with Star Wars. One of the examples is on display we have a samurai helmet. So when you look at a samurai helmet, when it's fully displayed, it has the sheeting guards all the way down. You look at that, and you look at the Darth Vader helmet, there's some connections that are just in your face, oh my gosh, he ripped this off, he did. It's really interesting. There's other ways where it is kind of more intangible, where you can see the spirit of what George Lucas did, and you can see that reflected in other objects. Kind of with the Force is a really great example. There's a lot of kind of work and a lot of indigenous thinkers and artists working with Star Wars because they identify with Force and being in balance with the light and the dark and being in balance with the world around you. And that's why there's a lot of indigenous artists working on Star Wars stuff. And so it's interesting to see that, material Star Wars, Darth Vader to samurai, that's obvious. And the intangible kind of ideas and heart behind Star Wars, if you will, being reflected in real world cultures, and technically the other way around. That, he looks at those cultures and created the Force as a thing. So it was really, really interesting to kind of tear apart something that I know. I'm a Star Trek nerd, so I don't know as much about Star Wars, but it was really interesting to tear apart something that I know and kind of compare it to the real world things that I knew, and I didn't really understand the connections between.
Thank you, Josephine. While Sophie runs up there, If you've not checked out the curriculum collection shows at UMA, I encourage you every semester to stop by, because they're always different. It's connected to courses across campus.
Yeah,
so
Dave
not,
Treberka does amazing work every year,
yeah, so it's not just art history or anthropology, it can be almost anything. So it's a really cool venue. Thank you, Brian.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophie Sheps. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a junior, rising senior at Michigan, and currently a curatorial intern at the UMA with Jennifer Fries, who's the Associate Director of Curatorial Affairs. Here's some of my information. I'll have my info at the end too if you want to reach out. But yeah, I'll get into it. I really love UMA. It's actually started out, Michigan's been collecting for a very long time, but it was officially established as a museum in 1946. That's the alumni hall area that, the apps that, I don't know if we've probably all been at this point. And then the building over here was added in 2009, so it's really gone through a transformation over the years. Here's the museum's mission. A few years ago, they redid their strategic plan and went through the rewriting of their mission, looking at all of the collection, rewriting labels, and then also kind of reestablishing what their values were. And I really love that about UMA. Here are the new core values. But yeah, this is from a report every year or so. UMA does a report to kind of track quantifiable things of how many exhibitions were held, how many visitors, just to kind of see how we're doing and gather some metrics to see how we can keep improving. But we had 11 exhibitions, over 7,000 visitors a month. That includes students and classes, elementary school people, everyone. We also had lots of virtual events and over 201 university course integrations. I know for some of the museum's courses we've gone to different institutions such as UMA, so that was really a great opportunity. And then in terms of personal achievements at UMA, I've been there for around a year now, and I'm really proud to have written a lot of gift offers that have been responsible for acquiring almost 400 works. Also having cataloged 200 works, so I've been able to see projects through from first writing the gift offer and doing research to actually getting the objects and handling them, so that's been a really cool experience. Also too, getting to work with artists. I've worked really closely with a woman named Joanne Leonard, who's a photographer. She also used to work at Stamps, but that was a really great opportunity, and right when I started last summer, I got to go to her studio and go through lots of her old prints and choose things for the museum, and now we're actually cataloging them into the system, so it's really cool to see it full circle. Here's a little bit more about what I do. So I write gift offers, as I mentioned. I work really cross-functionally with the registrar, director's office, and also programming. So curatorial really touches everything because you need lots of approval from lots of different functions. Also just lots of researching and doing research on artists, on our current collection, on upcoming exhibitions. Also getting to meet with artists and donors about gift offers and new works. Also to helping with exhibition catalogs. So most recently there was one that I got to help work on, and now it's out in the galleries, which is really cool. And just a lot more research. But overall, it's been a really good experience, and I really recommend if you're interested in the curatorial part, reaching out to different institutions and seeing if there are opportunities. This is one of my favorite work from Joanne Leonard, who's the woman that I worked pretty closely with during the start of my internship. And this is Winged Ones. It's actually her daughter, Julia, and she took it when she first came to Ann Arbor to teach in the 80s. So I really like this one. And then this is a recent one that we just got. It's part of her newspaper diaries. So she does this thing where she'll take these newspaper clippings and then find books and make connections to art and to different world happenings. And so I thought this one was cool since Manet is so well known, but then looking at different world events and what was happening in Russia and so forth. And so she still does this to this day. And so a big part of the recent gift offer was going through and selecting some for the museum. And so now UMA has the majority of her collection of these, which is really cool, spanning from around 2010s to now. So yeah, here's my information. Again, if you ever want to reach out, I'm happy to talk more about UMA and opportunities there. If you ever are interested in working at UMA, that's the QR code to the employment page. There are often internships in the summer. I think they're the Applebaum ones. I talked with someone recently about it. I think they're still doing it, but they just haven't put them out yet. But also, if not, too, just emailing a curator or anybody at the museum, I'm sure they'd be happy to have a chat and see if there are any opportunities. There's also SAB, which is a student board. I don't know if a few of you are part of it. I'm not. But I know that's a good opportunity too to get involved with UMA. But yeah, that's all. If you have any questions.
Quick question for Sophie. I have a really quick one. Did you know Joanne Leonard's work before you started working on this?
I didn't, but
Okay.
then once I started looking into it, I was like, wow, she's really something. Because she has things in the Whitney and the MoMA and all these places, and she's had such an interesting career.
She really has.
But yeah, also too, like the way her work's changed over time, from being more like photograph of like, she did lots in Oakland, California, like that was kind of her start. And then like she was with her husband, her late husband who was like a sculptor and like things like that. So she started off as that and then kind of got into more like mixed media, and so it's been cool to like learn more about that.
I love that.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. And she's such a nice woman too.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Sophie. Let's see. Next we have Ashlyn, but people should also eat this pizza. Right, Christy? Yeah, eat the pizza.
You know, but I have to give it to the grad students.
Yeah, the grad students.
They're waiting patiently.
Or
They
impatiently.
smelled it.
It does smell strongly in the lobby.
They were coming.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Ashlyn Slaviero. I'm a senior at Stamps Art School of Art and Design, and this is my internship that is kind of ongoing and will be continuing after this, which is really exciting. I've been working as a preservation assistant in the University of Michigan Library Preservation Services. So, for context, it's in this really sad, dreary building over by the stadium that nobody knows where it is. I didn't know where it is until I started working there. I guess a quick funny story about how I ended up in this position. I've been working on a separate project with the art and design librarian, Jamie Vanderbrook, and had just happened to mention an interest in conservation as a career. And she's like, "Oh, do you know about the library lab?" I'm like, "No, I don't. Could you connect me?" And she did, and here we are, like 5 months later now. So make connections, talk to people, tell them your interests. So this is Bird Building. It's home to all of these lovely services within the university, but mostly focusing on like library repair, storage, treatments, and whatnot. So within the lab, we essentially service any object, any book from any library on campus. So it's a really large collection that we get to touch and like that passes through the lab. So after being connected through Jamie, I met Marika and Amy, who are kind of the head honchos of the lab. Marika is the director of the Preservation Services Department, also has a specialization in papyrology. She presented in 401 for the conservation unit. And then my mentor that I've been working more closely with is Amy Christ. She is a paper and book conservator with a specialization in bookbinding. So within the scope of conservation, you kind of have your specialties as well as like additional certificates and other trainings in very specific things. But kind of on a broader scope of education, there are the graduate programs, which are few and far between within the United States. I think only six grad schools have specifically conservation degrees, and then maybe 8 have like certificates in addition to like a cultural heritage degree or a preservation degree. But they both are alumni of Buffalo State in New York, so that was helpful having that insight into the education, since it's a little inaccessible sometimes, trying to figure out what are the next steps you need to take to forward like the career. So this is kind of what I've been doing. I've been dipping my fingers in a lot of different things, going through the AIC ethics code, like going through training, understanding lab tools and equipment. But this was like the highlight so far. This was my first official conservation proposal and treatment. So this is kind of just an example of what the documents end up looking like. Documentation is key, making sure you're writing all of the conditions, the color, the status, repairs, what have you, as well as like photo documentation. So just thought it'd be interesting to show kind of what that ends up looking like. So when you're writing these, you write your proposal, you send it to the curator or the collections manager or whoever sent you the object originally, and they like read it, sign off, send it back. So in this case, it was actually from Jamie's collection, so it was kind of fun to send that to her myself and have her send it back, being very excited. So kind of moving from there is when you start working on the object. So with this object specifically, this is a artist book from the collection at the AAEL library on North Campus. It's a very unique book. Book is loose. And so I had the privilege to kind of play with it in a very gentle way, and explore like how it was being held together, what the condition was, understanding how it's changed since its creation. It's not very old. It's from 2003 by an artist named Sarah Peters. So kind of seeing what the condition was and assuming what it had been, and then also seeing the repair. So what had happened was the little tab tore off. And from there, working with Amy, we kind of discussed what strategies we would take, what materials we would use, since reversibility is also something very prevalent in conservation. Just making sure whatever you do can be undone if somebody deems it like inefficient or not as good as they would do it in the future. So this is kind of just a bit of the process. That was me actually doing the fix. So I was using a plant-based adhesive, which is water-soluble and reversible. And so in addition to the repair, I was also creating a custom housing for it in order to prevent like damage like that being done again. So these are some of the prototypes I've had. This is the haha. The box was a lot more complicated than I had anticipated, so we went through multiple different versions of that. This was a paper cast experiment, so we made our own pulp and used different half-sphere molds to try and create a like holding within the box. None of them ended up working out, but that's okay. It's a learning experience. It might be something useful in the future. And I guess, so here's more of those experiments kind of as a collective, and this is the final. So what ended up happening was we made this little cap to kind of cover up the Velcro so it wouldn't adhere again in order to prevent it from ripping. And this was the final box. And I actually have a video of kind of how it works. So another part of creating housing, especially for like custom objects like that, is making this instructional manual for anybody who is using it, since this object in particular is from a circulating collection. Students are handling it, professors are handling it, like it is accessible to everybody, so you want to make sure that people understand how to take it in and out without damaging it, but also like trying to make it like a little bit foolproof as well. So what ended up happening was that this drawer was made, as well as a sleeve for the insert that was included by the artist, and then these little, oh my hand's in the way, these little stilts that kind of cup it together so it's not putting stress on the hinge, as well as make it a little easier for someone to just pull it out, because otherwise it was just kind of rattling in there, and it was making all of us nervous just waiting for something to happen. Yeah, so these are kind of ongoing projects. That actually, the object just finished up maybe 2 weeks ago, which was very exciting. It's now back in its home. But something I've been working on continuously is 2 different rehousing projects. So this is a new one, actually. I just came from taking some measurements before this. This is the Estevez Artist Book Collection. It's this huge collection of weird books, all made of different materials, bindings, shapes, that were in an exhibition on North Campus recently. I think it was December. And essentially, again, Jamie Vanderbroek wanted these in better housing, because they're just in these manila envelopes with like a little slider, and some of them are falling apart, so they need some better housing. So last couple weeks has just been measuring, prepping to make what we call 4 flaps, which I'll show in a second, but also just enjoying looking at the very cool variety of these books. There's the orange one, some of them came in like a gift bag. Some of them have sand glued to it with like bottle tops. They're very weird. They're very fun though. And then the other rehousing project is the ginormous collection of Islamic manuscripts. So this was work I'd finished for a previous intern, and these are the floor flats. So this is a pretty standard conservation and just museum housing style. They're very simple to make, but they are, like, there's a massive amount of them. So this is kind of a picture of the collection. I got to go in. That's in the papyrology department upstairs in Hatcher. It's like a heat-controlled vaulted door, so I got to go in and check it out and see where my little floor flaps are going to go eventually. That's what I've been doing. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I feel like when I see conservation done, it's usually like really old works where the artist is no longer around. Do you ever like contact the artist and ask like how they want it fixed or like what exactly they did to make it so that you can do it better, or is it just the museums?
I think, because I had that conversation with my mentor about that book, and it was like, oh, should we reach out to them, see if she'll respond? And it was, from my understanding, more often than not, once the object is out of the artist's hands into a collection, it is up to whoever's in charge of the collection of how they want it done. Like, there's artistic integrity you try to keep, but you also, like, I'm sure the artist didn't really think about the box and how it would, like, hold the binding together in the long term, so, like, that's kind of where you fill in the gaps. I think maybe if it was, like, a major work, it might be a different story, but that was my experience, at least. Yeah.
I remember, like, last time we went to library, we were talking about, like, how not wearing gloves is more helpful. Is that the case for your experience as well?
Yeah, I was so surprised. My first week, I was like scrubbing my hands. I'm like, okay, wear the gloves. She's like, you're not gonna wear gloves. I was like, all right. It's actually, so you lose kind of the tactility of your hands. Like, you are less careful when you're wearing gloves because you can't feel the texture or if there's too much tension, or it's essentially like you got the nerves in your hands and they want you to use them to make sure you're being as careful as possible.
What was your favorite project that you worked on or have so far?
I think I'm a little biased towards this. So the book is called Necessary Disclosures. I think I'm biased towards that just because, like, kind of seeing, like you were saying, like, the whole thing happen, like, start to finish is really satisfying, but also just exciting. Like, getting to problem solve and, like, all those prototypes I made. It was just fun. There's something really fun about, like, the tactility of it, like, doing things with your hands and trying stuff. Yeah, that was probably my favorite.
Thank you, Ashlyn. Thank you also for doing such a great job in your position. It's actually kind of rare for us to be able to have undergraduates working in preservation lab. And that was true actually at Wilmot, even with art handling, until 2 years ago. We didn't have any undergrads, but now we've had a couple who've been so awesome that it's sort of opening up more opportunities, so. Take care.
For the beeping in the other presentations, my blood sugar was low. I'm fine now, but
Okay.
yeah. So last summer I interned at Experience Glasnevin, and it's a historical site and a non-profit. So it's Ireland's largest cemetery. It's actually still active. It was established in 1832, and over 1 million people are actually buried there. But there's also a visitor center and a small museum. And it was established as the first inclusive cemetery in Ireland, so it's non-denominational. Anyone can be buried there. This was during the penal laws when it was first started. So Catholics weren't allowed to be buried in certain manners throughout Ireland. So this allowed them another option, and any denomination as well. And a lot of historical figures from the Irish Republican movement are buried here, as well as the political figure Daniel O'Connell, who founded the cemetery. He fought for Catholic reforms and rights in the early to mid 17th century. And the tower you can see in the back of that is actually where he is buried. There's a crypt inside there. And then there's tours scheduled throughout the day. They're usually around the most popular figures, but there's also tours every month or so focusing on, like, specific women in the cemetery. I think there was also some about different, like, military figures. And then the Visitors Center contains the visitor service staff and 2 exhibits. One's about the history of the cemetery, and then one is about the famous figures, and there's also an ability to research any of the people that are buried in the cemetery. So I worked mostly as a docent in a visitor-facing role. I was often giving tours of the tower that I pointed to earlier, and then I would usually tailor the tour to the people. I had someone who had lived across the street for 30 years and had never visited the cemetery before, but he knew a bunch about the Daniel O'Connell and everything like that, but I've also, a lot of, obviously, people from out of the country were visiting as well. It's out of the city in Dublin, so it's a bit of a hike. So if people are making it out there, you have to make the experience worth it for them. And then I also worked inside the Visitor Center building, you can see there, doing things like booking, and also there's an archival system that you can use to locate graves. Because it's such a huge cemetery, you have to create a map for each person that's coming in to look for even just a family burial. I also would walk people out selectively to the burials so that they could find it, because people would be getting lost all the time. And then you would also give information as well. And then some of the things that I learned here was about specific archival information. Because it's mostly private information, you have to receive information from the person that's coming in first. So that was an interesting factor as well. And then using a digitized record system, because I hadn't ever used one before. And then the booking software, it was a little on the older side, so you have to just wait for everything to load, stuff like that. And then obviously wayfinding in the area. It's very nice. We were also next to the botanical gardens, which was a fun thing. I could walk over there most days, but. And then something about the work culture, if you wanted to know. Most of the staff was really easygoing. We were always joking with each other, but we still got the work done, and we dialed in when people were there. And then my supervisors were very similar to just the regular staff I worked with. There were a lot of tour guides. There's also a historian. I think they did genealogy workshops for people to come in and learn more about how to figure out more about their past and stuff like that. And then because it's farther from the city, I would have to take a bus every day, and everyone else usually did. The time was more lax at open and close when we were doing things. But thank you for listening.
Yeah, how many people were on the team that you worked with?
I think maybe 25. I would see the trustees every other day or so too, just walking around, but I think the tour guides were rotating, so it wouldn't be the same ones every day. There was probably about 5 or 6, and then in the visitor center there was 3 to 4, and there's just all the other staff. There was someone specifically for genealogy, the historian, and then other staff too.
What was the experience like getting into the internship? Did you have an interest prior to being there, or was it something you kind of learned as you were going through?
I knew I wanted to be in a historical site or a museum. This was actually, I was studying abroad at the same time, so it was a study abroad program that placed you into an internship. I just wasn't sure if I would be able to be in a specific setting like this, and I was so happy that they got me placed here. But yeah, I wasn't sure, when I first learned it was a cemetery, I was oh, how is this gonna go? But it was a lot different than that, because you use a lot of the history of the people, and there's the museum as well. But
when you were helping people find people, would you say you were usually helping them find relatives and ancestors, or it was mostly tourists looking at historical figures?
It was usually relatives and ancestors. Yeah. I got to know a good amount of when you're looking for someone's relative, they usually, in Ireland at least, because they're Irish, they tell you a lot about themselves, and they relate you to other people. I met someone, they're oh, my daughter's from Chicago, I'll give you her number. Okay. But yeah.
You said that when people came in to look for relatives, you had to wait for them to give you information of the family, which makes sense. But when you're doing these tours for maybe people who have been here before, does the organization ever research into older grave sites to add or modify what they talk about on tours?
For the specialty tours, yes. The main tour they do every day, I believe, I shadowed because I had to learn part of it, it's about the same information. It varies a little bit depending on the tour guide, but the specialty ones, I think there was one about people that are lesser known, and then they would research those specific people and then add that into it, but it wasn't every day.
Thank you, Anya. All right, Bond is up next. And there is still pizza and cookies over here.
Morning. My name, legally speaking, is Connor James Bond, although most people just call me Bond. So, I'm a film major, writing a museum studies minor as of this year, the museum studies thing. And for several years I've been working with Phil Holman, who is the head field librarian of the FTVM department. And when it came to this internship, he presented me with a very interesting set of things. Now I should let you know that this is still developing. These collections are not finished that I'm about to describe to you. They will not be available for a good while, but this is a bit of a sneak peek. So, about 5 years ago, a man named Jonathan Demme, who had passed away a few years earlier, donated his papers to the University of Michigan's Mavericks and Makers Film Special Collections. Now we've got lots of filmmakers of a variety of stripes represented in there, including Jonathan Demme, well, not Jonathan Demme, Jonathan Sayles, Robert Altman, Orson Welles, etc. Original manuscripts and materials they used to create their work. Jonathan Demme, when he passed, his stuff coming here, well, that's incredible. Specifically, though, I was tasked with 200 costumes from his film The Silence of the Lambs, which have been donated to this university. Now, it's rare for that many costumes from any one film, especially a film of such magnitude, the first and only horror film to win Best Picture at the Oscars, a real sweeping reinvention of Gothic media, what have you, and a whole lot of other things that I'll get into a little later. But to be in a public collection, major deal. But more importantly, it came in a very ugly package. 6 boxes. Just big brown cardboard boxes. And one other one that we're going to ignore. There was a lot of other stuff, but I was tasked with going through these 6 boxes of costumes and processing them. What that basically means is going through, cataloging them all, identifying what they consisted of, as well as who they belonged to in the film, how they were used, etc. And this was a fascinating experience. I mean, I am a major fan of film history. I am someone who's been deeply affected by this film. I know many people who have, for good and for ill. It's inspired many. It's one of the most famous crime procedural and horror thriller films out there. It's also had a lot of damage, because for as feminist for its time as it was, it also helped reinvent the transphobic concept of the trans serial killer in a really horrible new shape that, especially when we're talking about this right now in 2024, an idea like that has a lot of very dangerous legs and can do a lot of damage. But my job is to go through 6 boxes of what looks like someone's yard sale stuff. And that was really strange. Like, it was just a big pile of clothes in one area, or in others it was just a bunch of them in moving boxes. You gotta take these objects seriously, and I'm working by myself, although I'm being supervised by Phil. I'm measuring them, I'm doing what I can to identify them. Sometimes it's a little easy. For example, a large blue jumpsuit, and there's a little tag on it, and it says, Brockett is Mumbler, and that's it. It's just sitting on top of a pile. This is the first piece of clothing I encounter. So I figure, well, Brockett, that's gotta be a character or acting name. So I look up IMDb, eventually I'm able to find a man named Don Brockett credited on the film. Don Brockett is the first criminal we see in the basement where Hannibal Lecter is being kept of the Baltimore State Psychiatric Hospital. He's credited as friendly psychopath in the film. Don Brockett, I should also note, was a big regular in the Pittsburgh acting scene. Pittsburgh is where the film was shot. Many people in the film are regulars in the films of George Romero, or in this case, Don Brockett was a regular cast member credited on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as Chef Don, who, I don't remember him from the show, but it's good to know that he was put in jail where he belongs, at least in the movies. I'm sure Don was a nice guy. Others were difficult. White dress shirts you couldn't identify, shoes that were just in a box, what have you. But some were quite easy. This is really the first object I saw. A straitjacket that was on a mannequin, worn by Hannibal Lecter in the scene from the film. And this leads to the second part. Once you're done identifying, we had to photograph, prop up, and do all the necessary research in order to keep reference images of these objects available. Now, at this point, some of you are probably wondering why even preserve something like this? Well, I'd say the answer is the filmmaking process. That's an important art form. It's extremely, I would argue, the most influential art form, or one of the most influential art forms of the last century. Shapes the way we see the world, the way we think, the way we connect, communicate, etc. The objects used to make that are rarely highlighted or explained. I mean, they're pretty inaccessible to the average person. Through this, we can understand how they were made, how people thought. It's like anthropology for a fictional world as well. You see these inner workings of a literary and film universe that has impacted millions of lives, and you can also see every little decision that we don't even notice watching the film, because every costume in this collection, there's over 200 pieces that I've been processing, someone chose that. A decision was made. The impact is not always deliberate, but the choices are made. And also, people should see this stuff. This is sick. Like, hell yeah. But most people won't be able to. So through creating these, creating the catalog system, and currently working on a way to have them available online, the reference images, so anyone can look at these from home, these are ways to expand access to a very popular film's materials in a way most studios will not allow. And I know this because to research, I went to exhibitions. I even went to the Paramount Studios costume warehouse in Los Angeles and spoke with Randall Thropp, their head dude, to figure out, how do you store these? What do you do as an archivist? How do you make them not look like garbage on a mannequin? This looks good, but some of them really don't. Do you wash things when you put them in there? The answer is no. Jodie Foster's dirt-stained training uniform, you gotta keep like that because it's Jodie, she runs through the woods, you gotta. And I'll also say unexpected surprises come along the way that you don't know what to do. When you find a 30-year-old used napkin in someone's pocket, well, you gotta figure out how to, be careful with that. A blood-stained t-shirt, not real blood, of course. How do you even keep that from cracking when you put it on a mannequin? And surprises are still coming up. I've been working in this division for upwards of a year. And you might recall that in the previous slide, there was this large gray box that you ignore for the first 14 months. I open it one day because it's sitting on a shelf. It's full of tissue paper. And I begin pulling out the tissue paper. And I see 2 rubber human face masks, light pale. And I'm like, all right. This is something. I don't know what it is. We have photographs to cross-reference that I've been using. We have costume documents. This doesn't really apply, so I put it over here. I then see 2 large torso-like things that I take out. All right, weird spider web of dark liquid. It's all fake. Not sure what I'm looking at, but it's a bit gruesome. And then underneath are just layers and layers of latex skin. One sheet has 4 layers of stitches running across it. And I realize this is the remains of the infamous skin suit that is barely seen in the film. This is an object that is crucial to the film as its plot. It is one of the most infamous elements of it, despite only appearing for only a few seconds. Many people don't even, you can't get a good reference on Google Images for this object beyond a cake someone made, recreating its shape, etc. What I mean is, this can happen at any point. You can find the Holy Grail just sitting in a box in tissue paper. You just have to figure out how to be ready, how to process it, how to keep it from falling apart, and how we can learn from it, how the public can engage with it in any way they need to. I know I'm going all over the place, but when you spend 14 months in a dark, empty room full of mannequins and serial killers' wardrobes, something happens to you. I'm going to show you one last picture. There's a bit of gruesomeness in it. It's fake. Here it is. When it comes to putting it all together, this is from the movie, by the way. This is Hannibal or something. I don't know. The point is, it's difficult. It's weird. It's esoteric. You can easily question why even do something like this, but it's kind of like a crime scene. When you have the evidence for what creates the culture that shapes us, and that evidence can be made public and we can learn from it, understand how it shapes us, how it is made, how it happens, what it said or says about us, and how we can engage with even the complicated, painful, or sticky stuff going forward. Well, I think that's a really valuable thing, and I never thought an opportunity like this could ever exist within my grasp. So I'm very thankful to Phil Hallman, the FTVM department, the Special Collections Library, and everyone else I've worked with in this ongoing mess of a project that I love so dearly. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please let me know. Are there any questions?
Yeah, the bond.
It's okay if not.
So you said they're going to be photographing it, so there
We're
will be a
photographing.
digital archive that'll
Yes.
be publicly accessible.
Do not reach out to anybody. I should note about this, like, these are not available for checkout yet. Like, it's going to be a long time if they ever are. And some things like the skin suit, I think, would be endangered if they were available to check out. The rubber masks are pretty torn, and I don't trust myself to handle them. So, but yes, the photographs I believe will eventually be publicly available, one way or another. But please don't quote me on that. Anything else? Well, thank you all very much for your time.
And last but certainly not least, Russell. It's incredible just the different topics that I've been exploring in their internships.
Alrighty, hello everyone. My name is Russell, and today I'll be talking about my curatorial internship at UMA with Jennifer Fries, the Associate Curator of Photography and Associate Director of Curatorial Affairs. But first, a little bit about me. I'm a senior studying history and art history with the Museum Studies minor, of course. I just finished writing my thesis in history, analyzing how Jews used photography as a tool of resistance, looking at photographs that they took clandestinely in Nazi-created ghettos in Nazi-occupied Europe, and comparing those with Nazi-taken images of the same period. I have a little bit of previous experience in curatorial settings, having interned at Holocaust Museum LA, where I'm from. Something really unique about that institution is that it is the first survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the country, and there I engaged in researching the handful of survivors who had a stake in founding the museum upon surviving and then immigrating to the US and making their way to Los Angeles, and highlighting the ways that they contributed to the institution's creation. And then just to note why photographs and why I'm particularly interested in their unique stance between like the artistic and documentary function, and why they sort of like intersect with all of my interests is exactly that. I think their function as both documentary and artistic tools then necessitates these interesting questions in terms of how they're treated in museum settings. So what I do as a curatorial intern for Jennifer Fries, I would say that primarily I engage in research for exhibition development on specific artists that she wants to highlight in a retrospective. So for example, this LA-based artist, actually Terry Bronstein, Jennifer just recently acquired her archive and is planning a retrospective on her work in the upcoming year or so. It's still to be determined. But in terms of what I do for her is I conduct research on the works of art in this archive. Most recently, I've been having the opportunity to conduct inventories of works in this archive. She engages in a lot of mixed media montage and focuses on familial relationships, feminism, and just gendered sort of relations through photography. Also creates these really interesting mixed media sculptures and artist books. And so that right there I think is really interesting in terms of seeing how Bronstein sort of pushes the boundaries of the photographic medium, and I think that it's like in that regard, Jennifer's interest in Terry's work and the relationship that she sustained with her, I think just really goes to show how working for a curator of photography is a really unique discipline to be concentrating in within the curatorial department at UMA, because it's really expanded my understanding of what the definition of a photograph even is. Also, another notable project I'm working on is conducting research on the Asian American artist Jared Liu, who was recently just confirmed to host a retrospective in 2025 at UMA. His work focuses on race and identity in the Midwest, And this project specifically has been a really fruitful one for myself to engage in because I started in the initial phases of researching his practice to help confirm the retrospective. So that just entailed looking at different series. For example, this image right here is from his series Please Take Off Your Shoes. Looking at different series, cataloging and making lists of works that would be featured in the show. And most recently, I've helped to consolidate these inventory lists and actually format the preliminary tombstone information for object label drafts. So this project has been a really great one to sort of see throughout the phases of development from initial conceptual design to preliminary exhibition design. And then another major component of my day-to-day work is reviewing prospective gifts of art that are offered to Jen and the Modern and Contemporary collection at UMA. So when that happens, for example, with this artist whom I just wrote a proposal for in support of the museum's acquisition of this work, is Tony Lewis, who is an LA-based artist whose work explores graphite powder to confront social and political topics like race, power, communication, and labor. This image right here is actually not the one that the museum was offered, but it is from the same series. I haven't actually seen this image yet and won't until it gets on site, but it was just confirmed yesterday actually that the museum is acquiring it and did get the offer. So, for example, that process, what that looked like was I did a deep dive on Lewis's work and then sort of wrote a proposal as to how his practice is at all reflected in the current holdings of UMA's collection and then also looking at gaps that it could fill in terms of to answer the question of why would a work like Lewis's strengthen the Modern and Contemporary collection at UMA. And then ultimately, just in terms of why I pursued the Museum Studies minor and how this experience has contributed to my overall academic experience at U of M, I really appreciated this perfect balance that interning for Jen gave me in terms of balancing my a hands-on and theoretical approach to museum studies as we do in the classroom, like in 301 and 401. I also, specifically interning with Jen, has really complemented my study of history and art history, and specifically my interest in photography. And also it's just made institutions like UMA here and other museums at Michigan accessible and just enabled me to build on my past museum experiences. And ideally, has, I can argue, equipped me with some of the preliminary tools that I need to at least make the decisions as to whether or not I want to continue pursuing the field. And with that, I would just say that I reached out to Jen because her specialty in photography really aligned with my own interests this past summer, and that was how I got the role with her. So, and Sophie echoed this too because we worked together for Jen. But really, I think one of the best ways to get involved in hands-on museum experience, whatever form that may take here at Michigan, is to just reach out to professionals who are currently working in the field and whose interests align with yours, because truly all that sort of networking can do is just give you the perspective of what their work may look like and how you could perhaps fit into that, and then who knows, something really special like them offering you any sort of experience that you can get to work with them would just really be incredible. So I very much appreciate that one little email that I sent to Jen this past summer has resulted in all of this, so thank you. Yes, any questions? If not, all good. Yeah.
Would you characterize the Jewish photographs as being more clandestine, like they're up in the attic taking pictures from inside, or more just like they're framing it against something nonchalant?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd say that in my thesis, I looked at a couple different archives of Jewish taken images. They're actually, and I found this throughout doing research, there were many instances in which Jews were taking photos under Nazi occupation. Some, notable photographers like Henrik Ross and Mendel Grossman, they were in the Lodge ghetto in Nazi-occupied Poland, and they were actually conscripted to take photos for the Nazis in the ghetto. But then they also, so that was just taking more so like documentary photographs of day-to-day life. But then they also took it upon themselves to photograph clandestinely and really just capture the true arc of the Jewish experiences in these ghettos. I also did look at some photographers who were not conscripted by the Nazis but took photos took photos from like in an amateur photo capacity, but also taking images clandestinely. I learned specifically the one archive whose work I sourced was from the Holocaust Museum that I interned at. They recently held a temporary exhibit of a photographer whose name is Richard Juarez. He was an amateur photographer in Krakow before the war, and he actually smuggled his camera with him into the Krakow ghetto and just continued taking photographs of him and his family as he did before the war. And so throughout my thesis, I've argued that those acts of clandestine documentation of the continued sort of the ways in which Jewish life did endure to an extent could offer them an opportunity to resist Nazi occupation, and then also just looking at how creating photographs that then to an extent exist in perpetuity and their evidentiary quality that employs in and of itself like another more concrete example of resistance. Yeah, thanks for the question.
I have just a quick question, Russell, about the Lou retrospective that's going to be happening. So does Wilma have a significant collection, or will there be a lot of loans?
My understanding is that it will be loaning its work directly to Uma, and those haven't gotten on site yet because also a lot of this work is he's just finishing up his MFA, I believe, at Yale, and so he's still in the process of making some of this work, but once it gets here, yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Russell. Thank you all. Please take pizza or a cookie for the rest of your afternoon. It was amazing to hear sort of encapsulate